Ramsey County prosecutors have formally charged 8 members of a prominent activist group with conspiracy to riot and furtherance of terrorism. The 8 members of the RNC Welcoming Committee are believed to be the first persons ever charged under the 2002 Minnesota version of the federal PATRIOT Act. The activists face up to 7.5 years in prison. Ramsey County Attorney Susan Gertner announced the charges at a news conference Wednesday.
Through this week, I've seen much about my great city to celebrate, but it also in some ways has been a sad and painful time for my community. We have watched as a few lawless people tried to overshadow the peaceful protests and the exercise of free speech rights by thousands of law-abiding citizens. Some of the people who allegedly planned illegal acts to disrupt the convention and our community were thwarted last week when law enforcement agencies executed warrants and made arrests at several locations. Today, my office has charged 8 persons with the felony crime of conspiracy to commit riot in the 2nd degree for their alleged criminal activities as members of the RNC Welcoming Committee. All but one of those persons are currently in custody.
According to the National Lawyers Guild, the criminal complaints filed by the Ramsey County attorney do not allege that any of the defendants personally engaged in any act of violence or damage to property. Instead, authorities are seeking to hold the 8 defendants responsible for acts committed by other individuals during the opening days of the Republican National Convention. Most of the activists were arrested over the weekend in preemptive house raids. None of the defendants have any prior criminal history involving acts of violence. Authorities are basing their case on paid informants who infiltrated the group. The 8 activists charged are Monica Bicking, Aaron Trimmer, Luce Givens, Eric Osland, Nathaniel Secor, Robert Chernick, Garrett Fitzgerald, and Max Spector. Ramsey County Sheriff Bob Fletcher explained the terrorism charges.
It allowed us to execute search warrants last Saturday, as you know, on the leadership of the Welcoming Committee, and frankly, severing that leadership from the organization skills from that entire process was huge, because a lot of these anarchist groups that came here were supposed to be dedicated to different intersections, different sectors of the city, and by taking those maps away, really made it harder for them to coordinate their assault on our city. We only removed 10% of the problem, but the 10% we removed was the coordinating aspect of it.
2 guests join me here in St. Paul, Minnesota. Bruce Nesters, president of the Minnesota chapter of National Lawyers Guild, and David Bicking is the father of Monica Bicking, one of the 8 activists charged with conspiracy to riot and furtherance of terrorism. David Bicking lives in Minneapolis. Welcome both here to our studios at St. Paul Neighborhood Network, SPNN Public Access. Well, why don't we start with you, Bruce Nestor. Explain the significance of these charges.
These charges are very significant for any political activist or anybody that cares about the right to organize politically or for freedom of speech. By equating plans or stated plans to blockade traffic and to try to disrupt the convention with acts of terrorism, in the conspiracy nature of the charge, where you punish people for what they say or advocate but not for what they do, really creates a possibility that anybody organizing a large-scale demonstration at which civil disobedience may be a part of it, or where other individuals may then engage in some type of property damage, creates the potential that all those organizers can be charged with these conspiracy charges and face significant penalties.
What does it mean in furtherance of terrorism?
In Minnesota, that was a law passed after the attacks in New York on September 11th. It kind of tracks the definition in the federal PATRIOT Act, which is any criminal act, in this case at least a felony, that's designed to influence or coerce public opinion or to disrupt a public assembly. And so my guess is that the charge is based upon the idea that there was an attempt to disrupt the RNC, which would be treated as a public assembly, even though they didn't apply for a permit under St. Paul public assembly laws to do so.
David Bicking, your daughter Monica is one of the 8. First, can you talk about her activities?
Yeah, my daughter Monica is a wonderful person, very concerned,
How old is she?
very committed. She's 23, and She and all the people, I mean, the people they've charged here are not criminals. They're some of the best people in our society. She's really dedicated to her activism. She's experienced activist already. She's come about this through her own experience in her life over a long time. She was always concerned about the feelings of others. She's done some travel abroad. When she was 8, we were in Ecuador for 4 weeks, and she saw the poverty and the children begging, but also humanized it by playing with the children of the maids in the, inexpensive hotels there. She went to Honduras for 8 weeks after her junior year to work in a very remote village, humanitarian work. After high school, she took off a year before college and worked as an intern with the American Friends Service Committee, which is a Quaker peace group. She was based in Chicago and helped in their organizing their peace work and liaison with other groups. So she has a lot of experience, and she's really seen what it means when, the United States actions through war, through injustice at home, through poverty, and how that's affected people's lives. And it's affected her very deeply. And so she's strong. She'll get through this one way or the other.
Is she still in jail?
She is still in jail right now.
When was she picked up? How was she picked up?
She was picked up on Saturday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning. She was staying in her house, which she had just bought a month before. And there were several roommates there and a whole bunch of people who had come in for the week. And at 8 o'clock in the morning, they were woken out of a sound sleep. The police came banging through the back door, held everyone at gunpoint. They had automatic weapons, assault rifles, forced everybody, ordered them to the floor, face down, handcuffed them behind their backs, and then proceeded to search the entire house, just ransack everything. When I got there 45 minutes later, she and her boyfriend Aaron and a housemate Garrett were already in one of these big black SUVs they have, and were taken off to jail just after that. And then for the next hour or so, they released the other people in the house one by one after photographing them, checking ID, and searching them. Then the search of the house went on for another like six hours probably, as they carted all sorts of stuff out of the house. I watched, as they took things out of the garage. There were old tires. I suppose those would be burned someplace. There were just the sort of things homeowners would have, especially people fixing up a house. Many cans of paint, each which was patiently labeled and loaded onto the truck. It was just an absurd overreaction.
What is the RNC Welcoming Committee?
The RNC Welcoming Committee is a group that defines itself as anarchist or anti-authoritarian, and she was working with them very closely, as were these other people. They saw their role as facilitating the protests and the actions around the Republican National Convention this week. Their major function was to help other people from out of town come and express what they wanted to express and do what they wanted to do to protest or to resist the convention. So they spent a lot of time setting up housing, medics, legal support, child care, but of course also, and more interest to the authorities, helped coordinate some strategies, helped people brainstorm about what sorts of things could be done or what would be effective. And so members of the Welcoming Committee traveled around the country, meeting with similar groups around the country to talk to them so that people could, as a whole, come to some agreement of how not necessarily all use the strategy, all the same tactic, but how their actions could be coordinated instead of at odds with each other. So they were not planning the activities of this week, but rather helping others to plan and forming some sort of consensus so that this could all work and people could come here and do what they plan to do.
How much time do they face?
Up to 7.5 years under these charges.
Have you seen Monica in jail?
She was released for a few days and then is back in again. So I've been able to talk to her about her experiences in jail and talk to her a little bit about all of this, and she could tell me more about how she experienced the house raid and the effect it had on her.
Her boyfriend also one of those arrested. He's in jail.
Aaron Trimmer, yes. Yeah, another fine man. As a father, I couldn't be happier with her choice of a partner. Very committed individual, also kind of quiet, but very dedicated, yes.
Bruce Nestor, there have been over 300 arrests.
That's right. A number of felony arrests on probable cause that just started to go.
Explain what that means, on probable cause.
It just means that the police officer is allowed to charge someone based upon their description of events. It doesn't go through a prosecutor or a judge. In Minnesota, that allowed anybody arrested on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Monday to be held until noon on Wednesday.
Because Labor Day was Monday, so it goes beyond, it can only be business days.
That's right. And then a judge actually signed an order extending that 36-hour to 48-hour period. A number of
So ultimately, it just keeps them through the Republican National Convention.
That's correct.
In jail. I mean, we saw this in New York in 2004, the protests of the Republican National Convention. This was under Mayor Bloomberg. They then, the police there arrested over 1,800 people. Hundreds have been, you know, the charges were all dropped against them. But it was just clearing the streets until afterwards. And then they just, the city dealt with the consequences of having falsely arrested them in the years to come.
What we're seeing here is not quite as widespread, but it's a similar pattern. The charges started to go through the court system yesterday. I believe about a third of the felony charges were dismissed outright, and then a number of others were reduced to misdemeanor and referred to the city